You've heard stories of kindness, but this one unfolds within the guarded, gilded gates of a palace. It's a tale where the stiff, royal protocol met the unpredictable warmth of the human heart. It began not with a royal decree, but with a small, persistent question from a boy in a wheelchair, and a palace guard who discovered that his most important duty was not to a crown, but to a child's impossible dream. This is the true story of how a moment of unscripted compassion, witnessed by thousands, became a modern fable of hope, one careful step at a time. The morning air in Madrid was crisp, carrying the weight of history and the quiet buzz of a city waking up. Outside the royal palace, a scene of immaculate order unfolded. The changing of the guard was a ballet of precision, a ritual unchanged for generations. Among the solemn-faced guards, their red and blue uniforms stark against the gray stone, stood Javier. To the streaming tourists, he was a statue, eyes forward, back rigid, a part of the palace's furniture. But behind the unwavering posture was a man who took a deep pride in his duty. He saw himself not just as a protector of a building, but as a guardian of a nation's symbol. His world was one of measured steps, prescribed movements, and absolute silence. One bright Saturday, the usual crowd gathered. Families pointed, cameras clicked. Javier's eyes, hidden behind his solemn expression, scanned the scene as part of his training. That's when he saw him. A young boy, perhaps 9 or 10, with a thatch of dark hair and eyes that held more curiosity than awe. He was in a wheelchair, his mother's hands resting lightly on the handles. They visited often, Javier realized. He'd seen them before. While other children ran and laughed, this boy, Diego, would watch the guards with an intensity that was different. He didn't just look, he studied. He observed the swing of a leg, the click of a boot heel, the exact angle of a rifle against a shoulder. For weeks, Diego and his mother, Elena, were part of the background. Then, one afternoon as the crowd thinned, Diego wheeled himself a little closer to Javier's post. Elena hovered nervously, a whisper of "Carino, no mole star. Sweetheart, don't bother him," barely leaving her lips. Diego ignored it. He looked up at the imposing figure, a giant in a bearskin hat. "Excuse me," Diego said, his voice clear and steady. Javier, against every rule, allowed his eyes to flicker down. A minute movement. "How do you stand so still? Don't your legs hurt?" The question hung in the air. Protocol screamed for silence. But the human in Javier saw no mockery, only genuine inquiry. With the tiniest movement of his lips, barely perceptible, Javier murmured, "Practice." And very strong boots. He saw Diego's face light up with a smile, as if he'd been handed a secret. The next Saturday, Diego was back. "How much does your hat weigh?" "Another week." "Do you ever get to smile?" Each time, Javier would offer a microscopic, one-word answer or the faintest nod. A strange, silent understanding began to grow between the stone-faced guard and the boy in the wheelchair. Elena watched this with a mix of anxiety and wonder. She knew her son's story, the accident years ago, the doctor's grim prognosis, the slow acceptance that walking might forever be a memory. Diego had retreated into books and history, the palace guards becoming his knights, his giants. Javier, without knowing it, had become the most real of them all. Then came the day that changed everything. The crowd was particularly large. Diego, trying to get a better view, maneuvered his chair near the front. In the jostle, a tourist stepped back without looking, bumping hard into the chair. Diego's notebook, where he sketched the guards and their uniforms, flew from his lap, its pages scattering across the cobblestones. The tourist apologized and moved on, but Diego's face crumpled. The book was his treasure. Javier saw it all. The breach of protocol was enormous, unthinkable. But he saw the boy's devastation. In a decision that felt both instantaneous and eternal, Javier took one sharp, formal step to the side, then another. He bent his stiff uniform at the waist, a creaking of leather and wool, and, with his white-gloved hands, began to pick up the papers. He gathered each sheet meticulously, stacking them neatly. He placed the retrieved notebook gently back on Diego's lap. Their eyes met. In that moment, Javier wasn't a guard. He was just a man helping a child. He gave the smallest, briefest wink before straightening up, resuming his post, as if carved from marble once more. Diego sat frozen, holding his notebook like a holy relic. Elena had tears in her eyes. The crowd, witnessing this silent drama, erupted in a soft, spontaneous applause. The shell of ceremony had cracked, and something beautiful had slipped out. The incident with the notebook dissolved the last invisible barrier between Javier and Diego. What followed was a series of quiet, Saturday morning revolutions. Javier remained at his post, a statue of duty, but he now reserved a specific, almost invisible softening of his gaze for when Diego arrived. Diego, in turn, became Javier's most dedicated observer. He learned to read the micro-signals, the slight tilt of the head that meant hello, the nearly imperceptible lowering of the chin that was a yes. Their communication was a secret language of glances and minute gestures, conducted under the noses of thousands. Elena, overwhelmed by the guard's kindness, approached him one day as his shift ended. She waited until he was officially relieved and, walking away from his post, a man again instead of a symbol. "Señor Guardia," she said softly. Javier turned, his civilian face kind but tired. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "For the notebook. For seeing him." In those few sentences, she shared the barest outline of Diego's story, the car accident that had stolen his ability to walk, the years of therapy that had led to a plateau, the quiet resignation that had settled over their family. "He admires you so much," she finished. "You've become his hero." The word struck Javier deeply. He was no hero. He just picked up some papers. But her words planted a seed. The following week, during a quiet lull, Diego wheeled up closer than usual. He didn't ask about the uniform or the routine. He looked up at Javier and said, very quietly, "I wish I could stand like you. Just for a minute." The words, uttered with such simple longing, pierced Javier's disciplined heart. He thought about it all week. He thought about his own son, about duty, about what it truly meant to protect and serve. He realized his duty wasn't just to a palace, but to the people it represented. And in Diego, he saw a boy whose spirit was trapped. The next Saturday, Javier did something unprecedented. He had coordinated with his commanding officer, a stern man named Captain Ruiz. Javier had explained the situation, not asking for permission to break protocol, but asking for guidance on how to fulfill a higher purpose. To his surprise, Captain Ruiz, a father himself, listened. He gave a stern warning about dignity and order, but also a tacit, grudging nod. "The monarchy," he said, "is also about compassion. Do not make a spectacle." So, as his shift neared its end, and the crowd was thinner, Javier executed his plan. He finished his formal march away from his post. But, instead of disappearing into the guardhouse, he changed out of his full ceremonial uniform, keeping on the simpler trousers and shirt. He walked back out, a man now, not a guard. He approached Diego and Elena. Diego's eyes were wide as saucers. "Diego," Javier said, kneeling down to be at eye level. "You said you wanted to stand. Would you like to try? With my help." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Diego could only nod, speechless. There, on the vast plaza before the palace, under the wide Spanish sky, Javier gently helped Diego out of his wheelchair. He supported him fully, his strong arms around the boy's thin frame. Diego's legs, weak and unused to bearing weight, trembled violently. His feet, in their sneakers, scuffed against the cobblestones. It wasn't a step. It was just a stand, a quivering, monumental effort that lasted maybe 10 seconds. But for Diego, it was flying. He was eye level with the palace walls, seeing the world from a new height. A sob escaped Elena, who filmed the entire moment on her phone with shaking hands. When Javier gently lowered Diego back into his chair, the boy was beaming, tears cutting clean tracks through his smile. "I stood," he whispered, as if saying it made it real. "Like a guard." Javier squeezed his shoulder. "Better," he said. "You stood like a warrior." Part 3. The video on Elena's phone was a raw, shaky, profoundly intimate document. It was just a minute long. The tall, off-duty guard in partial uniform, kneeling, lifting a trembling boy, holding him steady as he fought to stand, the mother's choked sobs in the background. She showed it to Diego every night. It was his new favorite thing, more precious than any movie. After much deliberation, and, with Diego's excited permission, she decided to share it on a small, local community Facebook page with a simple caption: "A guardian angel at the royal palace. Our son's dream came true." The internet, that unpredictable beast, took the tender, private moment and cradled it gently for once. The video did not just go viral. It spread like a warm, hopeful sigh across the country and, then, the world. Overnight, Javier and Diego became symbols. News headlines called it "the guard" and "the boy." Talk shows dissected the power of kindness. The royal household, initially cautious, was inundated with positive sentiment. They issued a formal statement praising Guardia Javier Martin for exemplifying the values of service and humanity. Captain Ruiz found himself giving interviews, his stern face softening as he spoke of his soldiers' initiative and heart. For Javier, the fame was jarring. He was a private man who cherished the anonymity of the uniform. Now, cameras sought him out. People pointed on the street. He was given medals and commendations, which he accepted with humble gratitude but deep internal discomfort. His greatest unease came from the distortion of the story. It was being framed as a fairy tale, a perfect, one-off act of charity. But, for Javier, it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. He saw the fire he had lit in Diego's eyes during those 10 seconds of standing. He couldn't extinguish it now. He visited Diego at home, away from the palace glare. The small apartment was filled with models of palaces and drawings of guards. Javier sat with Diego and Elena. The standing, Javier said, his voice low and serious. It was good. But what if it wasn't just once? He proposed an idea, not as a guard, but as a friend. He had researched and spoken to a physiotherapist in his own family. He believed, with proper, careful, and consistent support, Diego could do more. He could learn to take a step. Elena was terrified. Hope was a dangerous thing. It made potential failure so much more painful. Diego, however, was resolute. "I want to try," he said, with a fierceness that brooked no argument. So began the secret project. Every Sunday, Javier's day off, he would arrive at Diego's apartment or a quiet local park. He exchanged his bearskin hat for a baseball cap, his uniform for a tracksuit. He was no longer Guardia Martin. He was Javier, the coach. The first sessions were brutal. Diego's muscles, atrophied from years in the chair, screamed in protest. The simple act of bearing weight was agony. There were falls, caught always by Javier's strong arms. There were tears of frustration from Diego, and tears of silent heartbreak from Elena as she watched from the window. Javier was endlessly patient, a blend of military discipline and gentle encouragement. Again, he would say, not as an order, but as a promise. "We will do it again until your body remembers what your mind never forgot." Weeks turned into a month. The media frenzy died down, moving to the next story. Javier and Diego preferred it that way. Their work was in the gritty, unglamorous details, the tightening of a muscle, the shift of balance a centimeter to the left, the sweat on Diego's brow as he concentrated with all his might. The world saw a beautiful picture. They were living the difficult, beautiful process of creating it. The bond between them deepened into something familial. Javier learned about Diego's dreams of being an architect who designed accessible buildings. Diego learned about Javier's own boyhood dreams of being a teacher before life led him to the military. They were, in many ways, helping each other find lost pieces of themselves. Part 4 The secret Sunday sessions became the anchor of both their weeks. The park in the early morning, dew still on the grass, was their private training ground. Javier had fashioned makeshift parallel bars from sturdy pipes set in concrete, borrowed from a friendly construction worker. Here, Diego would labor, his knuckles white as he gripped the bars, Javier positioned behind him, a steadying presence, hands hovering, ready to catch but never interfering unless absolutely necessary. Progress was measured in grains of sand. First, it was standing unassisted for 30 seconds, then a minute. Then came the terrifying, exhilarating concept of weight transfer, shifting his balance from one foot to the other. To Diego, it felt like trying to tilt the Eiffel Tower. His body fought him, a prisoner of habit and injury. Javier's voice was his constant guide. "Feel the foot, Diego. Push into the ground. The earth is holding you up. Trust it." It was more than physical therapy. It was a lesson in faith. One cool autumn Sunday, the breakthrough came. Diego, drenched in sweat from an hour of effort, was at the bars. Javier, as usual, was behind him. "Okay," Javier said softly. "Don't think about walking. Just think about reaching for the next bar with your right hand. Just your hand." Diego, focused on the simple instruction, shifted his weight to his left foot and stretched his right hand forward along the bar. His right foot, as if acting on its own ancient memory, lifted slightly and shuffled forward a few inches to follow. It wasn't a step. It was a drag, a scrape. But it was a movement he had initiated. He was no longer just standing. He was displacing himself. Both of them froze. Diego looked down at his feet, then back at Javier, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Did I?" Javier's face broke into a full, unguarded smile, a sight Diego had only seen once before. "You moved, soldado," Javier said, his voice thick. "You moved yourself." That tiny, scraping shuffle was their D-Day. It proved the impossible was merely difficult. From there, a new energy infused them. The drag became a deliberate placement. One step, then two. The distance between the parallel bars became a marathon course. They celebrated each inch. Elena, who had been a nervous witness from a park bench, began to bring a small whistle and would blow it softly like a race official every time Diego completed a new personal best. The sound of that whistle became the soundtrack of their triumph. Javier knew, however, that the bars were a cage. The true test was the open space. He brought a simple, lightweight walker. The first time Diego tried it, outside the security of the bars, he was consumed by panic. The vastness of the world without support was terrifying. He froze, his body locking up. Javier didn't push. He simply knelt in front of him, placing his own strong hands on the walker's grips, overlapping Diego's small ones. "I'm not letting go," Javier said, looking him straight in the eye. "Look at me. Just at me. The rest of the world isn't there. It's just you, me, and this next step." Diego locked onto Javier's gaze, an anchor in a sea of fear. Slowly, he lifted a foot. He placed it forward. Then, the other. They moved across the park grass like that, a strange, four-handed, six-legged creature of pure will. With every successful journey, Javier's grip lightened, until one day, Diego realized he was holding the walker himself. Javier was just walking beside him, his hands now at his sides, ready, but not needed. Part 5. The dream, unspoken for so long, now formed in Javier's mind with perfect clarity. The Palace Plaza was their starting line. It had to be their finish line. Not in secret, but in a quiet, dignified triumph. He wanted Diego to walk there, on the very cobblestones where he had only ever rolled or been carried. He proposed it to Elena and Diego. "Not for the cameras," Javier explained. "For us. To close the circle." Diego agreed immediately. The palace was his Camelot. To walk there was his knighthood. Javier, with a newfound confidence, went to Captain Ruiz. He laid out the plan not as a request for a spectacle, but as a respectful petition. He asked if, one quiet evening after the palace closed to the public, Diego could be allowed to visit the courtyard. No media, no fanfare. Just the boy, his mother, and a few guards who had become, in their own stern way, invested in the story. Captain Ruiz stroked his chin, looking at the soldier before him. He saw not just a guard who had broken protocol, but a man who had built a bridge between an institution and a human heart. He gave his official permission. The evening arrived, cool and clear. The grand Sabatini courtyard of the royal palace was empty, its monumental scale even more imposing without the crowds. A handful of guards, including Captain Ruiz, stood respectfully at a distance. Javier stood in the center, out of uniform, in simple clothes. Elena wheeled Diego through the giant gates. The click-clack of the wheelchair wheels echoed in the vast space. Diego looked at Javier, then at the long, polished stretch of stone ahead. The walker was there. This was it. All the practice, the pain, the sweat, led to this moment. A flicker of the old terror crossed his face. The plaza was enormous, the goal impossibly far. Javier walked over and knelt, as he had that very first day. "Remember," he said quietly, only for Diego to hear. "It's not about the palace. It's not about the distance. It's about one step. Then, the next. Just like in the park. Look at me." Diego took a deep, shuddering breath. He gripped the arms of his chair. With a tremendous heave, he pushed himself up. Javier's hands were there, steadying him as he transitioned to the walker. His fingers curled around the cold metal. He looked ahead, then back at Javier, who gave a single, firm nod. Diego looked down at his feet. He willed his right leg to move. It was heavy, so heavy, but it obeyed. He lifted it and placed it forward on the ancient stone. A solid, clear step. Then, the left followed. He didn't look up again. He fell into the rhythm they had practiced 1,000 times. Step, pause, shift, step. The walker creaked softly. The only other sound was the soft scuff of his soles and the distant hum of Madrid beyond the walls. Javier walked beside him, a half-step behind, his entire being focused on the boy. Elena watched, one hand pressed to her heart, tears flowing freely. Captain Ruiz and the other guards stood ramrod straight, but their eyes were glistening. Diego walked 10 steps. 20. He was tiring, his breath coming in short gasps. "You can stop," Javier whispered. Diego shook his head, gritting his teeth. He kept going. He was walking in the shadow of kings, but he felt like a king himself. Finally, after what felt like a mile but was only the length of the courtyard, he stopped, his energy spent. He had done it. He turned, still holding the walker, and looked back at the incredible distance he had covered on his own 2 feet. A sound escaped him, part laugh, part sob. Javier didn't clap. He didn't cheer. He simply stepped forward and wrapped Diego in a fierce, silent hug. It was a hug that said everything: pride, respect, love. The guards, breaking their own protocol, began to clap, a slow, respectful, thunderous applause that echoed against the palace walls. It was not the roar of a crowd, but the profound acknowledgement of peers. Later, as the story of this private walk eventually found its way into a popular podcast, the host asked Javier what it all meant. Javier, now comfortable with the story, thought for a long moment. "We think duty is about standing still," he said, his voice calm. "About guarding what is. But sometimes, the truest duty is to help something move forward. Diego taught me how to walk, too. He taught me that the most important posts we guard are not made of stone, but of human connection." The story, from a dropped notebook to a walk in a moonlit courtyard, was no longer just a viral moment. It was a testament to the unseen journeys we make when we dare to step out of line and into someone else's life.